He had spent years moving through the world unnoticed, trained to observe every detail and speak only when necessary. But on that quiet evening, as he drove home from a long day of fieldwork, something shifted. The flashing lights appeared suddenly in his rearview mirror, cold, sharp, and unyielding. He pulled over, calm and compliant, never imagining what would unfold next. The officers approached with a tension he could feel through the glass, their eyes fixed on him with a suspicion he didn't yet understand. And in that moment, one question pressed against his breath. How could a simple stop turn into a threat he never saw coming? For most of his 48 years, Daniel Mercer had built a life around quiet precision. He was the kind of man who rose before dawn, long before the neighborhood stirred, and sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of dark coffee that he never sweetened. His routines were steady, almost meditative: morning jog, quick shower, a wordless glance at the day's briefings, and then the long commute into the city. To the people on his street, he was simply the polite man with the Navy sedan, always offering a gentle nod, never drawing attention. But behind that calm exterior was a life few would ever know. Daniel had served more than 2 decades as an undercover field agent for the FBI, a role that demanded not only intelligence but the kind of restraint that left no room for ego. He believed in the work, believed in fairness, accountability, and the quiet dignity of doing the right thing, even when no one noticed. His home sat at the edge of a quiet, tree-lined suburb where evening shadows stretched across lawns in long, soft strokes. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks, elderly couples tended to their gardens, and porch lights flickered on at the same hour each night. It wasn't the kind of place where anyone expected tension or fear. Daniel cherished that stillness. It reminded him of the small southern town where he had been raised, where his parents taught him to speak respectfully, work diligently, and walk with his head high, despite the subtle, sometimes heavy looks he'd received as a young black boy in spaces where people didn't expect him. By all accounts, his life was ordinary on the surface. He read history books in his spare time, repaired small appliances when they broke instead of buying new ones, and called his sister every Sunday evening without fail. His world was predictable, structured, and after so many years of unpredictable assignments, that structure felt like shelter. Yet on the day everything shifted, Daniel felt something different lingering in the air. The sky had been strangely dull, as if the daylight itself was weighed down. Traffic was slower, unusually tense. Even the briefing at the field office had been shorter than expected, ending with a quiet good night from his supervisor instead of the usual lighthearted exchange. It wasn't anything he could point to, just a feeling subtle but persistent. As he drove home, his thoughts drifted to the weekend ahead. He planned to visit his mother, help her fix a loose window in her living room, and maybe cook the dish she always loved: slow-roasted chicken with rosemary. Simple things, familiar things, the kind of moments he treasured because the world outside of them often felt too sharp. But steady routines can make sudden disruptions feel even sharper. The road he took that evening was nearly empty, the twilight fading into deeper shades of blue. Street lamps flickered on in quiet succession. Daniel eased into the flow of the last intersection before home, his mind already unwinding. Then he saw the patrol car behind him. He didn't think much of it at first. Cars passed, officers patrolled. He'd been through countless traffic stops in his lifetime, some respectful, some uneasy, a few that lingered in his memory longer than they should have. But this time something felt off. The cruiser kept its distance, then edged closer. Daniel checked his speed, perfectly within the limit. His signals proper. His tags, updated just last month. Still, the patrol car followed. And though he stayed calm, that familiar heaviness began to curl in his chest, whispering a quiet question he had learned long ago not to ignore. What was this really about? The patrol car's lights flicked on without warning. First a sharp burst of red, then the rolling wash of blue that filled the darkening street. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel before he guided the sedan toward the shoulder. His movements were deliberate, practiced. He had coached others through this exact routine countless times. Slow down, signal, pull over safely. But no training could soften the old familiar weight that settled into his ribs, the weight he had carried since adolescence, since his father's quiet reminders to keep your hands visible and speak slowly, no matter how they speak to you. He put the car in park, lowered the window, and waited. For a moment, there was only silence. The patrol car idled behind him, engine humming low. Through the side mirror, Daniel watched the two officers step out. One younger, one older, both walking with a strange, stiff caution. Their flashlights cut through the night in narrow beams, circling the edges of his vehicle as though searching for something that wasn't there. But what happened next, no one saw coming. The older officer approached the driver's side. His jaw was clenched. His grip on the flashlight was tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He didn't start with a greeting, didn't offer a reason for the stop. He simply said, "License and registration," in a tone that felt more like an accusation than a request. Daniel kept his voice even. "Of course, officer. I'm reaching for my wallet now." He moved slowly, narrating each step as he had been taught. Not because he needed to, but because experience had taught him that clarity could mean safety. The younger officer circled toward the passenger side, his flashlight sweeping across the dashboard, the empty seat, the floorboards. He stepped back, then forward again, as if unsure what he was looking for. When the older officer examined Daniel's license, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A twitch near the eye, a tightening of the lips. It was the kind of look that suggested a story was already forming in his mind, one Daniel was not a part of, yet somehow trapped within. "This address current?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir." "You work in the city?" "Yes." "What do you do?" A simple question, but delivered with a suspicion that felt out of place. Daniel answered calmly, "Government work." The officer's eyes narrowed. "What kind of government work?" Before Daniel could respond, the younger officer approached the driver's window. "He's being vague," he muttered to his partner, as though Daniel were not sitting inches away. "Could be hiding something." Daniel inhaled quietly, steadying himself. He had seen this dynamic before, one officer feeding the other's uncertainty, building tension where none needed to exist. "I can clarify," Daniel said gently, "but I'd need to retrieve my identification from my jacket in the back seat." The request seemed harmless, but the officers stiffened instantly. "Don't move," the older one snapped, stepping back with a hand hovering near his holster. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Daniel stopped with a calmness that belied the sudden spike of adrenaline beneath his skin. "My hands are right here," he said, placing them on the steering wheel. "I'm not reaching for anything." Another silence, longer this time. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow, controlled, but unmistakably present. Then everything escalated. The younger officer moved to the rear door, opening it without permission. "Sir, step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Daniel complied, easing out slowly. The night air felt colder now, brushing against his arms like a warning. The officers guided him toward the side of the road, positioning him away from the driver's door. "Is there something wrong?" Daniel asked, still respectful, though his voice held a quiet firmness. "We'll ask the questions," the older officer said. A second patrol car arrived, its tires rolling softly over the pavement, its lights bathing the street in harsher shades of red and blue. Two additional officers stepped out, scanning the scene with quick, assessing eyes. Daniel's mind cataloged every movement. For officers now, raised tension, lack of clear communication, a scenario that could tip in any direction. But what happened next changed everything. One of the new officers, tall and wiry, pointed toward Daniel's back seat as though he'd discovered something alarming. "There's a jacket in there," he said. "Heavy duty. Could be hiding equipment." The older officer nodded. "We need to know what he's carrying. He's not saying much about his job." Daniel spoke again, steady and controlled. "My identification is in that jacket. It will explain everything." But the officers didn't hear the explanation, or didn't want to. "Turn around," the younger officer said. "Hands behind your back." For a moment, A long, suspended moment, Daniel froze, not out of defiance, but out of disbelief. 20-plus years serving federal investigations, working cases that spanned states and agencies, and here he was, being treated as a threat for reasons no one had explained. He turned slowly, hands behind him, fingers interlaced. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked open behind him. He felt the first touch of steel against his wrist. And then he heard a voice he recognized. "Officers, stop. What are you doing?" A car had pulled up, a dark SUV, its headlights cutting across the scene. A man stepped out quickly, one hand raised. Agent Collins, Daniel's colleague, his supervisor on several cases, the person who had signed off on the undercover assignment earlier that week. Collins approached with urgency. "This man is a federal agent," he said firmly. "Remove your hands from him right now." The officers exchanged confused glances. The younger one went pale. The older one bristled, as though the correction itself offended him. "He didn't present any credentials," the older officer argued. "He couldn't," Collins shot back. "He told you exactly where they were. You never gave him the chance." Silence fell thick, heavy, undeniable. Daniel stood motionless, the half-closed cuffs still hovering behind his back. The night air seemed to still. Even the passing cars moved more slowly, as if the world itself paused to witness the moment. One of the officers finally spoke, voice low. "We didn't know." Collins stepped closer, his tone cold. "You didn't ask." But what happened next revealed even more. The tension didn't disappear. It deepened, reshaped into something sharper. Something unspoken yet painfully clear. The officers weren't embarrassed because they were wrong. They were embarrassed because the man they misjudged held authority they hadn't expected. Authority they hadn't associated with someone who looked like him. Daniel felt the truth ripple through the air, as unmistakable as the flashing lights around them. And though the handcuffs never closed, the damage had already been done. The night air had grown heavier, pressing against Daniel's chest like a weight he couldn't lift. Even the distant hum of the city felt muted, as if the world itself held its breath. The flashing red and blue lights painted every face in stark contrast. Some shocked, some defensive, all aware of the silent tension between them. Daniel's hands were still hovering where the officers had guided them. He had learned to measure fear, to channel it, but this wasn't fear of danger, it was disbelief. How could a man trained to protect the law be treated as a threat simply because of who he was? The injustice cut sharper than any blade. Collins stood beside him, authoritative yet tense. "They don't understand," he said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Daniel to hear. "They see what they expect, not what is real." One of the officers finally broke the silence. We thought," his voice faltered. The words hung, incomplete, almost meaningless. Every officer there could feel it, the heavy weight of assumptions, bias, and unspoken judgments. Daniel met the older officer's eyes, slow, measured. "I've spent my life protecting people from harm, enforcing laws, preventing crimes," he said softly, voice steady despite the surge of emotion. "And yet tonight I was assumed guilty, because I looked different than what you expected to hold authority." The words landed like stones in a quiet pond. Ripples of discomfort spread through the officers. Some avoided his gaze, some clenched their fists, some simply stood frozen, unable to reconcile what they had done with what they now knew. The younger officer swallowed hard. I didn't mean." Daniel held up a hand. I know it wasn't personal. But that is the point, isn't it? Assumptions are never neutral, they carry weight. And that weight can be dangerous, even deadly, when it blinds people to the truth. For a moment, the night was still. The wind that had brushed across the street earlier was gone. The distant traffic seemed to fade into nothing. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat echoing, loud and persistent, a rhythm of disbelief and sorrow intertwined. Then he spoke again, quieter this time, almost a whisper to himself but resonant with meaning. "How many others don't get a Collins to step in? How many others are judged before their truth is even considered?" No one answered. The silence was the answer. Collins finally placed a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Let's go home," he said. Not a command, but a recognition that the moment had been survived, not resolved. Daniel took a slow breath, feeling the tension loosen only slightly. The officers began to step back, regrouping, retreating into their patrol cars. The flashing lights softened, the hum of engines returned, but the lesson lingered, sharp, clear, undeniable. Even in the quiet aftermath, Daniel knew the world hadn't changed. The officers hadn't meant harm, yet harm had been done. Perception had triumphed over truth, assumptions had eclipsed judgment, and the weight of injustice remained, pressing invisibly on anyone who looked different, even in service of the law. As Daniel climbed back into his car, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement, he glanced at the rearview mirror. The reflection staring back at him was calm, composed, but beneath it, the ache of recognition remained. The world could be blind, and by the time Daniel returned home, the adrenaline had ebbed, leaving a heavy, contemplative quiet. The street was as serene as it had been that morning. Children's bicycles leaning against fences, porch lights flickering, the faint scent of blooming flowers carried on the evening breeze. Yet the peace felt different now. It was the kind of calm that follows a storm you never expected, leaving a residue you can't shake. He stepped inside and set his keys on the counter, eyes lingering on the familiar objects of his daily life. The worn coffee mug, the stack of newspapers he hadn't read yet, the small family photos tacked to the fridge. Everything seemed unchanged, yet everything had changed. That encounter on the road, fleeting as it seemed, had forced him to confront a truth he had known intellectually but never experienced so viscerally: the fragility of perception, and how quickly authority and trust could fracture under the weight of assumptions. Later, when Daniel spoke to his colleagues, they all agreed. The officers hadn't intended harm. Yet intention had nothing to do with impact. The emotional toll of being misjudged, of being treated as a threat simply because of appearance, was undeniable. He realized that truth, no matter how clear to oneself, is never universally recognized. It is filtered, distorted, and often ignored by others' expectations. The incident rippled beyond his own consciousness. Friends and family noticed the quiet pause in his demeanor, the moments of reflection when he stared at nothing in particular. His mother asked gently if something had happened at work. Daniel smiled faintly and shook his head, but inside, the questions lingered. How often does the world misread integrity? How often do assumptions, subtle or blatant, shape outcomes that affect real lives? In the days that followed, he filed a formal report through the Bureau, not out of anger but necessity. The report became a discussion point, a case study within the agency, a reminder of how bias, unconscious or otherwise, could infiltrate even the most controlled systems. Yet Daniel knew that a report, no matter how meticulously written, could not undo the moment. It could not erase the silent fear of being misunderstood, the realization that even those sworn to uphold the law could fall prey to assumption. He returned to his routines: coffee at dawn, morning jogs, brief calls to family. But each step carried a new weight, a deeper awareness. The familiar streets no longer felt entirely safe, not because of danger, but because of the fragility of recognition. People judge in moments, often in fractions of a second, and those judgments can have lasting consequences. And yet, amid the quiet reflection, Daniel found resilience. He knew his role: protecting others, advocating for truth, standing firm when misperceptions threatened fairness, was more important than ever. His faith in people's capacity for good had not vanished. It had been tempered, sharpened, and made more precise. He understood now that strength is not only in action, but in persistence, patience, and the courage to continue even when the world fails to see you clearly. As night fell over the suburb once again, Daniel looked out his window at the familiar shadows stretching across the lawns. The air was calm, almost deceptively so. He held on to one truth above all: moments of injustice, however brief, leave marks. But those marks can also inspire vigilance, empathy, and change. And the question that lingered in the quiet of his home, and perhaps in the hearts of every viewer, is one we all must consider. When we witness injustice, do we speak, act, and stand with truth, or do we remain silent, allowing assumptions to dictate reality?